You're in a pickle. You got a great home, you got a great rate, and you bought at a pretty good time. And now you want to buy something else. But you don't want to get rid of that investment or that first home you bought because the situation is too good. I've been seeing that plenty in the last few years and now in this market full of, unfortunately, shitty rates. We've been hovering in a 6% environment with a hint of even 7% environment for almost 3 years. And it's getting to the point where buyers are truly wondering, what do we do? And this solution I'm going to talk about in this video is what I'm seeing a lot more often, but I want to be able to make sure that you make a great decision, especially since it's a new decision for you guys. So I'm going to go over 5 things you should know before renting out your property and those things that you should set up in the meantime. Now, trust me, there's a lot more that goes into owning a rental property. I do own my own rental property outside Florida, and I've been through quite an adventure of things to get things set up correctly, but also in a manner that helps me scale it while keeping my peace of mind. So this could apply to the person watching this video in the situation where they have a COVID rate of 2.5%, 3%, and they just don't want to let go of that property yet. And now they want to buy a property, and how are they going to make the math work? The math there, typically rent out your home for obviously a good market value that covers your mortgage and then some. And that extra cash flow you have in between your monthly rent and your monthly mortgage on the property, that extra cash flow each month makes that new payment for the home you're buying a little bit easier to swallow the pill, because that extra cash flow just makes it a little bit more digestible and less expensive, of course, over time. This isn't a how to rent your home A to Z, but these are my tips I'm going to recommend to you and some things that you may not have thought about to consider. Because if you are in those shoes, I know it's a lot going on in your mind, and not everyone's built for the landlord life or owning multiple properties, but I would love to see that become a reality more and more, especially if it's a solution that keeps our housing market moving forward in a better direction. Number 1, run the numbers like an investor. It is not as simple as your rent that you're getting every month minus the mortgage you're paying for the property. You got a lot of things in between to consider, some that are fixed costs, some that are variable costs, and some are costs that you choose to take on. Things like vacancies, things like understanding your taxes on your property will most likely go up if you have not homesteaded your property. Your insurance is likely to go up just a little bit because now you're going to get more of a landlord insurance. You still got to consider the idea, are you going to maintain the property like landscaping, a pool if you have a pool, and some other items, or are you going to let the tenant do that? Disclaimer, I would do it yourself. A vacancy reserve, because you got to think about it. If you're renting something for 12 months and that tenant is ready to leave, do you have a tenant ready to go same day as that one tenant moves out and all money's paid at perfect timing to where you have no gaps of time? Never. You will always have a vacancy at some point in your rental. Also consider reserves for repairs, short-term and long-term. Short-term being little things in the house that you may be responsible for, or it's just easier for you to handle versus the tenant. And long-term things, just like a homeowner would have to consider AC, roof, plumbing, electrical, appliances, the whole 9. You still gotta have money put aside to cover that later on. Those types of bills that could sneak up on you, you're really gonna start hating the rental life if that's something you don't consider now. So really consider the real numbers when you're dictating the whole situation and what you truly make cash flow versus the pipe dream. And I know sometimes you're gonna run into some bad math. Sometimes you're gonna run into deals that aren't deals. Sometimes you're gonna run into a situation where you might break even. But I'll tell you a couple things that make it not as bad. In a normal investor scenario, I would not recommend a deal that breaks you even. But if you're a solo buyer of a property, just looking to rent your current property to be able to afford your next property, a break even might be something to consider. Why I want you to consider it? There are 2 major things to consider here. I want you to think about the mix of the appreciation long-term your property will always have, which on average, I think a national average is 3 to 4% a year, which doesn't really make sense for like a 20-year timeline, but short term and long term, the average is 3 to 4% a year. Combine that with the equity you're still building every single month. Now that you have a tenant in place, now that you're renting this thing out until further notice, you are building equity every single year. If you're early in your 30-year mortgage, you're not building massive amount of equity. Where you start seeing a turn is around year 7 to year 10. You can look forward to 5 to 10, maybe even more $1,000 a year in equity depending on your mortgage amount. Take that type of equity into account in your calculations every month and every year. It's not so bad. On top of that, once you run this legitimately as a business and report things accordingly, you have a lot more tax benefits than you realize. This isn't just a primary home anymore. You have a lot more opportunity tax-wise to take advantage of. I'm no accountant, but I have a damn good one. And I know exactly what I can take advantage of with our tax code and what things are gonna benefit myself, my property, and overall my financial situation. Things that you could either write off or partially write off are the following. And please consult with your tax professional. Things like depreciation of the property, mortgage interest overall, property taxes, insurance premiums, repairs and maintenance over time, property management fees, HOA dues, utilities if you do cover them, travel and mileage if you are one traveling to the property and back for any purpose of the property, and professional services relating to the property, like your CPA, lawyer, things like that. Now, I'm gonna jump to Ohm at the home office. He's gonna go through a live example of some numbers with a property to give a little bit of a realistic scenario of what it could look like for cash flow. Thank you, Ohm, from the home studio. This is Ohm at the home office. The example I wanted to bring up was just a property I noticed a while back that stuck to mind because I used to live in the nearby area and actually saw this home be purchased, renovated, rented for many years. And it came to mind when I want to give you guys an example of a home that was bought at a certain time, renovated, and or just as it is, whatever situation you're in. And then from there, renting it out and having some sort of cash flow. And then now you can see what that realistic number looks like. So my example, not to out these people, I don't know them, but I'm assuming they're good people, is the 245 Sable Avenue is a property that was bought back in November and October of 2020. It was bought for $248,000. And you can see the inside just for reference. It's a 3-2, a little bit smaller side, but pretty nice overall, very nicely renovated, clean, easy. So given that this was bought, when it was bought, I do have access to the loan information and the sale, and that being the mortgage amount of $245.60 at a 2.8% in that month of 2020. So the information I have to make the best educated assumption of what their mortgage is a purchase price of $248, a down payment that looked like around 3%, for 30 years at 2.8% with a zip code of our area. And then from there, I did use a proper tax amount. Looking at my county website and going over to the taxes being paid, it is around $300 a month. So from there, $300 a month for taxes. Insurance in our area is a little tough. So I put $200 a month because not only are you getting insurance in Merritt Island for an older home, you also are probably securing landlord type insurance instead of primary home insurance. So that rate is typically higher. PMI, I don't want to assume what the amount of PMI is because it differs per loan amount and your situation. So I'd exclude it for now, but in your calculations, obviously include it. And I know this area does not have HOA. So when I just hit an update to show you guys, I already had it updated. $1,488 was the mortgage. The breakdown is $988 for the mortgage, $300 for taxes, insurance is $200. If you are renting out the house, you have the choice of providing the maintenance or lawn care or other things like that, like pool care if you have a pool, or not. In my professional opinion, I usually would provide it, so it's my controllable factor and it's my expense still that I can take away, right? So I can either upcharge the rent or at least I have some controllability of what my landscaping is going to look like, because renting out to strangers that you don't know, I would like to control as many variables as I can. So I put down $100 for lawn / pest control if it makes sense, So my total monthly in a version of a sense for this math is $15.88. So from there, funny enough, they did rent it ever since really then. They have a history of renting it, and their rent recently this year, 2025, they did rent it for $2,250. So knowing that number, I use that in my market rent calculation. So you technically net $662 a month. Now, if you are to do nothing else and just assume you rent and you have this as now your cash flow, sweet, you could think that way, that's fine. But if you're looking to do this in a smart fashion or looking to do this long-term and to sustainably grow and scale some version of this, or just be smart about it, I would also put in 10% of your money. I'd make sure you'd have for, let me take that out. I would make sure to have reserves set aside each month at a 10% rate of the monthly rent for vacancy and repairs, which I talked about in the video. Vacancy is a factor, repairs are a factor. So taking away 225 from 662, we are left with 437. I would also recommend property management. You do not have to, but if you do, I would set aside 10% a month of rent. That's what you're typically going to pay them. Another 225. So in these scenarios, you could just blindly say, sweet, I make $662 a month. Not necessarily. If you do it smart, have some reserves for the situation as reserves help, really $437 a month. And if you choose to go the property management route, $212 a month is what you'll net. Now, some numbers look great and some numbers don't. That's on you guys to really think about. If we just look at this number right here, $662 a month. I mentioned this later in the video too, but let's take today's rate of 6.6%, make it easy. I want to go from having this $248,000 home to maybe a nicer, newer-ish home at $450 a month. And $450 a month, $450,000 a month. From there, I put 5% down, and I have my rate of 6.6%. My taxes are probably going to be around 400, let's do 350 a month. And my insurance, this is my primary home, so taxes would be a teeny bit less. Insurance, let's just assume, also is a little bit less because maybe it's a newer home or a better home. And let's assume because we are doing it less down, we'll have a little bit of PMI here. And we don't live in HOA, maybe we do, $50 a month. My payment is $3,380 a month for the home, which is not amazing. Don't love that. That's why a lot of people aren't buying right now. But let's take away an easy, let's call it the $662 for easy math. That's honestly around the 2,600 or 2,700 range. That's much more digestible for a lot of people. 2,700 beats 3,300 any day, right? So what's crazy is that's a good reason to justify buying now if you have a property you can rent and cash flow. So many people are waiting for rates to go down, right? So if we reduce this rate to a rate that people would probably favor a lot, which right now everyone would favor a 5% all day, but let's just say really if rates were back in the mid fours to high fours, we'd have a version of a frenzy or at least activity to be buzzing. People would be more interested, right? Let's just do this whole scenario at a price tag that's all the same, just interest rate was less. 4.6% rate for the same home is still $2,800 and some change. So our example of having a property now, renting it instead of selling it, having that cash flow, buying now, it equates a little bit closely to if you were someone waiting for rates to go down. So that's where, I don't want to sound like every agent that just says, yeah, buy now, buy now. Inventory's at its highest. If rates go down, inventory's going to go down too, and you'll fight for homes and prices will go up. I mean, it's unfortunately going to be true. But at the same time, let's fast forward to time that you're waiting for, which is this. This is still your payment. If we can make a version of this payment work today, you got a lot more options. You still keep the property that you want, so now you're building equity. And you probably get a house you truly want because the inventory is there for it. Now, When we take a real example of only netting $212 a month, truthfully, and the right way, at a 6.6% rate, we're only down to like $3,100 a year. And if rates go down to a flat 5, we're at $2,950. That gap's not too horrible, you know? So the thing that actually will only probably make a big difference here is today that 450 home is 450 at 6.6%, right? Let's say we go down to 5% rates and now all the buyers out there buzzing like we're talking about. Let's say this house goes to 475 instead. We're at a 2744 at 5%. So, you know, realistically, like how much better is this all getting, you know, versus like we just talked about a 450 today at the 6.6 with our cash flow to some degree. Oh wait, it's changing the down payment. That's why it's messing up. Sorry about that. I was wondering why I messed up the math. Now that math equates to what we said before, a $3,300 mortgage and our cash flow being subtracted to around $3,100. The same home in a better rate environment turns into $475. It's all kind of the same math. The big pro, like I'm going to talk about the rest of the video, you got tax advantages renting out your home. You still own the home and now you have equity being built. So personally, that's a great strategy if you can stomach it. So I'm going to go back to Ohm in the home studio, and he's going to dive into the rest of the video. On to number 2, decide on property management up front. You got two choices, self-manage the property or hire a property management group / property manager. I'm gonna give you the pros and cons that I understand and you make the best decision for you. You just gotta understand, do you wanna delegate or do you wanna save money? Things that you'll delegate are short-term and long-term and have to do before a tenant is placed, while the tenant is placed, and after a tenant is placed, and all the things that come along with that. From the before aspect, who's gonna answer calls about the property once for rent, who is gonna handle applications and reviewing them, who's gonna drop paperwork accordingly and store all of this information and paperwork, who's going to communicate throughout this whole process, who's going to handle what move-in should and could look like, who's gonna handle the maintenance of that property over time on top of any calls regarding the property, including repairs, complaints, and anything in between. Who's gonna handle any tenant switchover where we gotta basically repeat that process, but also make sure once a tenant does move out, everything does seem to be in place in great condition. And if it's not, then getting those things situated, handled, and moving forward. Your choice to handle those headaches as some see it and self-manage the property, which I honestly would recommend if you're trying to maximize your monthly profit while only maybe handling 1 or 2 properties. The only reason why I might self-manage in this situation is 1, I'm close to the property. 2, I'm ready to handle everything I just listed a second ago. And 3, I need the money in some fashion. Most property management costs 8 to 10% of the monthly rent. So let's take a $2,500 monthly rent. I'm paying that property manager $250 a month, essentially as long as this property is rented out. And you may not always feel that $250 being worked and used, but trust me, when it's worked and used, is super helpful. So if you're trying to save that money, you're close to the property, you kind of know what you're doing, you can handle these things as they come up, and you can manage this over time, save the money. It's totally fine. But if you're someone who's a little bit skeptical, a little bit afraid, or just truly wanting to delegate the whole thing and just set and forget the property, find a good property manager, pay them that 8 to 10% a month, and let them do their job. What's gonna be super important here is find a good one. Google ones nearby, check the ones that have great reviews, vet them a little bit, check their website, check the property managers, see what properties they have under management currently, see if you have any access to communicate with people under them to get their true opinion on how that property management group has done for that property for that owner. I personally own a property out of state and I immediately opted into working with a property manager. I'm over 1,000 miles away from this property and there's no way I'm ever gonna be able to do anything remotely present to that property or handle things that can come up. With my monthly rent, with my property management fee, and with my mortgage, I'm still cash flowing a good amount of money to where it is worth the non-headache. So if you're trying to scale this or just delegate, go the property manager route. If you're someone who's a little hard-headed, knows how to handle these things, is okay with handling these things, and want to save the few $100s a month, go ahead and self-manage. Both come with their pros and cons. Number 3, prep for low maintenance living. Think about things like carpets in a room versus LVP. Think about small repairs up front to do before someone moves in versus during them being moved in or after they moved in. Little things like caulk around windows and bathtubs and sinks and all those little areas, let's just scrape it up now and do a fresh coat over everything. So we have that longevity in place. We don't have to worry about anything happening anytime soon. Things like, let's get rid of the fancy fixtures and put some normal stuff in. Let's paint the walls a neutral color to attract more renters. And depending on where your property is or what the situation is, anything that seems a little high maintenance, let's consider not having it on the property or in the property. Things like pest control, lawn care, pool care, termite bond, anything you could think of. Personally, from a homeowner standpoint, I'd continue covering it yourself and maybe bake in the cost into the monthly rent, or to a degree, eat the cost. Mainly because it's still becoming a version of a write-off for you, but also you now have the full control of who's doing this work and you are making sure it's getting done. And especially when it's as easy as already just auto paying the service and continuing it with really no intervention from yourself, it is much easier for you to continue it versus a tenant picking that responsibility up. And now you have a variable you can't control. On to number 4, protect yourself with strong screening. I get it. I don't love the landlord mentality and I don't love the stereotype behind being a landlord. And trust me, I'm not trying to be or cause you guys to be the greedy landlord type, but there is a difference between running this as a hobby or just winging it and running it a little bit like a business. Think of a job that you've worked in the past that's maybe more set up to the corporate world. Or think about really any job you worked in the past that's more than just one random employee winging it every single day. There's always been systems and processes in place, but there's always been structure in place to some degree. Continue that structure with how you decide who gets to live in your asset. When it comes to tenant screening, these are the people that either protect your asset or ruin your asset. And through just a couple small details, you can make sure you're giving yourself the best chance to have the best tenant in place to protect your asset and to make this not suck so much. Because I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot of horror stories when it comes to renting out your home and bad tenants and whatever else is in between that. And let's just try to control that variable as much as possible. Many minimal things are put in place to at least give yourself the best pool of tenants to choose from. Now, of course, we cannot discriminate, but there are certain things you're still allowed to do when it comes to making sure your tenant is a version of qualified or at least fit for the home as a great tenant. You can make great decisions on factors like the following: having a minimum credit score, income of all applicants combined should be 3 times or more of the monthly rent. You typically never really want to see evictions on anyone's record. If you have the option, or you can have your property manager do it for you, verify employment and income through the employer of any applicants that you're considering. Some of these may sound obvious, but some also people do ignore sometimes. A good sob story later and someone may just say okay, and that's not how you want to treat this. No offense to anyone, but if there is something on your record or you have a bad credit score or a recent eviction, there's a story to it. And if the story isn't great, why are we placing the tenant into the home? So be careful on your tenant screening because this will make or break your asset. Personally, the property management I'm using in the state that I have my rental, they actually make sure they see the tenant at the property just to meet them in person. And they also check in with any recent properties they've rented to make sure there's no lies or discrepancies on the application. So they'll check in with past landlords to see if everything lines up. Those little steps make such a huge deal. Number 5, structure a lease that makes sense for you the best, but also structure it to make the most sense. I'm not saying screw over the tenant in any way, but I am saying set black and white rules on what happens. X equals Y, call it a day. Things like the term of the lease, the payment options, when payment is due, pet fees and how they're laid out, what rent increases look like if you guys opt in to continue this lease, what does maintenance look like, both by the owner and by the tenant, any repairs of a certain amount of money, under $200, under $500 must be done by tenant, just ideas like that. All black and white on paper. Probably always require renter's insurance from the renter to not only cover your butt, but to cover their own butt, and so many more things. Keep this legitimate, keep it very black and white, cover your butt, cover their butt, cover all bases. There are so many small provisions you could throw into a lease that benefits both parties, but gives everybody clarity. and it gives you predictability of the future. You know when things go right, wrong, left, right, up, down, whatever way it might go, you know which direction to go with it. There's no question mark, there's no negotiation. It's pretty black and white what to do when things happen. Bonus, this is not number 6, this is more just me showing you some realistic math of what the situation I just laid out looks like. You got a home a few years ago, you have a great rate with that home, you wanna buy a home today. It's more money than you really wanna spend at the interest rate that you really don't like, but we're gonna go ahead and rent out the current home to offset the cost of the new home. So my example I have in front of me is for a 4-bedroom, 2-bath home in Merritt Island, Florida. This home was purchased by a couple for $248,000 in November of 2020. They put around 3.5% down. This was a normal 30-year mortgage. And at that time, their rate was 2.8%. We're gonna calculate with principal and interest, insurance, and taxes. Taxes are around $300 a month and insurance is around $200 a month. We'll also throw in PMI of around $100 a month. This brings our total monthly mortgage for this property to $1,583. I'm not fluffing up numbers for this example. This property did rent out this year, month to month, for $2,250. So that's our example. We have $2,250 minus our monthly mortgage of $1,583. That leaves us with $667 in profit every month. Now, in my existing mortgage of $1,583, my calculation of taxes is as accurate as you can be because the taxes are based on a non-homesteaded property, and insurance is pretty accurate assuming they do have the correct insurance. Now, I wish that profit was true profit. You have decisions to make at this point. Do you just take the profit? Not really worry about property management, don't report the income. I wouldn't really recommend that, but are we just straight pocketing $667 a month? That's up to you, I can't tell you. But let's just assume that is the basic number I can give you for now, $667 a month. Today, you wanna go and buy a $450,000 home. That home at today's rate at 6.8% interest with proper taxes, insurance, 5% down, and PMI included is around $3,797 a month. Now, if we subtract our cash flow of $667, what's kind of crazy is if you're waiting for rates to go down from 6.8 to let's say 5 something. I did the math on the exact same mortgage for a $450,000 home, same insurance, taxes, PMI, down payment, etc. at a rate of 4.8, so 2% lower than our 6.8. And our payment would be $3,192. So doing our current math on what our home could rent for, the payment's essentially the same. And what we could buy for and what that offset looks like. So if you feel like you're waiting for rates to go down and you have a current property that you'd either sell or rent out anyways, it may make sense to buy now, depending on your situation. Now, $667 a month, that's not realistic for what you'll cash flow because we're not including anything I talked about in this video. Property management versus self-managed, vacancies, reserves, taxes, both taxes you pay on your income plus tax benefits of the property and now it being a rental and so much more. But if you wanted a simple-ish math, that's it. So trust me, I totally understand. COVID rates back in 2020 to 2022 compared to rates now that are in the 6s all day, it's not great. But if you do have a property that you bought during that time or even way before, you just don't want to let it go because it just isn't worth letting go yet. You want to keep that property, keep that investment. Renting out could be an amazing option. I hope my video laid out some facts and some truth behind doing this process, but also educated you a little bit more on what it looks like to own a property and rent a property out. And trust me, if I had another hour, I still probably couldn't explain everything that goes into properly doing your first rental property or your 5th, 10th, or 100th rental property. You decide how it's done. You decide what's proper. I'm just here to educate you. If you got a unique scenario you want to run by me, email me, text me, call me. I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. And if you're just looking to do real estate in the Brevard area, I'm your go-to agent. Contact me however you like. Everything you need is in the description below.